Telling on the Cousin of the Tower and Shanju saying for the Shefa. Very much and Shanju saying for the Shef.
So yesterday in the text, in the root text, we had this idea of the mind of enlightenment, right? Bodhicitta coming up, and so that's why this morning we're going to discuss that mind in more detail, right? So hopefully you understood some of that, right?
That is that. The Kazangi and the Tamjo dealer, shouldn't pay Jiju, shouldn't Malay, should look at the reader. Only that, Dilla Kalerna. Ani the word to Balas, Mizuba Pamba. Tapenang Zoga Chiki, Miss Shambaina Karina, who the word to Gora. Then they would the word to put the Magawachi, Papango, Rielo. Then the Anisawa de la Carana, Paging the Casatosara. Simjan Haji Dendupe, Shanchu de Rosara. Shanchu de Senchi Nesra, Chesa, Simjan Haji Dendupe, Shanchu de Senchi. Chesa Hazogi, Shanchu Sem lay the Carolina, Simjan Haji Dewan de cheating on Shanchu Senchi Ra. Shanchu Sem lay the condition as Simjan Haji Devala Kundu that I got to Chidan Rosara. Simjan Haji and Sanjaki Command and Goyada. Then they Sanjaki Command Govala, Tananga Roji, Sojitami Paji, go to Umares. Take Karichuna Ani, Simjan Haji, Sanjaki Sale, Kuyagichidi, Ani Tamborani, Sanjego. Penanga Tagingi and me in Dambana, Sadiana, Kambat and Dambara, whom did a chickilla Robachitumara. Chesan, Soso Gana turn any mission but the Robache Lila. Then they in Sanim. Shanchu sang me Koran Tambora Carlana, Jen to Mele church way into but send the Nishgora. Chesan Ani Chene, Simja Rangi is Denina, the Simja Korangatana, the order Toina, tell a choke carchin to do so. Anzu Sama, Shanchu sang Rajula Chag, Mu Korakarana, Jen de Wata Chidres. Then Jen de Buddha Chibuda Tenude, Anzu Tatos and a Carchiburella.
So, good afternoon. So, we pick it back up again where we finished. So before was the root verse 80, right? Where we have this outline talking about abandoning intolerance or aversion towards others' happiness, right? So, on the one hand, we understand that all sentient beings wish for happiness. So, it's kind of a strange thing that we develop aversion or we dislike it when others get happy, right? So, in that way, the verse says, since one wishes all sentient beings to have happiness, then having generated the mind of enlightenment, when sentient beings find their own happiness, why do you get angry at them, right? And so we discussed yesterday that what this mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta means, right? So it's this attitude of this mind that wishes for all sentient beings to attain enlightenment, right? It wishes to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. But then thinking that actually I myself, at the present state, I'm not really able to do that, right? I don't have the capacity to do that. So therefore, in order to be able to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment, I myself must attain enlightenment first, right? And so it's kind of like giving the example, if there's a bunch of people and they're all kind of stuck in mud or quicksand or something, then, if everyone's in the mud, then it's very difficult to help each other get out because everyone's stuck in there. What you need is someone who's outside of the mud, and then they can pull people out. So in the same way, one wishes to attain enlightenment in order to be able to also lead all sentient beings to that state. And so now when we're thinking in terms here, about sentient beings attaining their own happiness, then it seems kind of strange, right? We know that all sentient beings don't want to suffer; they only want to be happy. And so when they get their own happiness, why do we dislike that? Why do we develop aversion and jealousy towards that? It just kind of doesn't make sense.
Nami in a chambo chawada, Jacob Penzo chambo chaw, Manzu Gutilla, the Chado Majachi, Gawachina, Sosolai Giasagre, Manzu Tados and Susu near the Yason Dragi, Juchawarmish, Pagitali can do Mara, Tados and Ra, Ndichidigal and Aranzuki, Jimmy Mish Pashola Penjo, the Juno Jukande Apojumba in a re, Debu the Chibu the Kare, Pusun Soba in a Manzuga, could be Gala Sando. Chisnea, the no one to think Rimbusa in a Korangi, Tadachi, Hama Korangi, which is 7 degrees. Dile Yahira. Timasaje and Tadoro chain the Simchidina. Susumachi di Dojon Shahura. Simba Pagila can game house the Woody, Tindichina Tenda Major Roja Missinara. Tenez Aranzo, Tangarazo Chun Samachun in Aranzo Samachun Tire, and the Junju di Nation, this son of Tanasholo Dudigala, Namdisu Tado Saudoina. Tiba Bangway, the kitchen bra. Me, Miller Tato chair, or any Miller Jeffy or the Lingazuta, Sarsungora, the Samaso, the D. Chenachum to Santa, Can Tarini, Mitzi, Sawach Sutunea.
So then in that way, thinking of how to practice with respect to this, then, whenever we see others and whatever good things that they have, whether it's, they have all sorts of riches, or they have a very close relationship with their family, or, they have nice environment and different things around them, whatever good things that people have, trying to have a sense of joy with respect to that, right? Rather than developing jealousy, right? Because jealousy, if we really think about it, as we've been discussing, it really only makes us miserable, right? It doesn't really harm the other person in any way. The only person that's miserable by getting jealous over these things is ourselves. So it is a much better way to train the mind to be able to develop joy and rejoice in other people's, welfare and good things. And also thinking, that actually, whatever good things that they have arose due to their own causes and conditions, right? So these people have created the causes for those in the past, and that's why they're enjoying these things now. So how wonderful that is, right? So therefore, when it comes to practice this particular section, then really trying to kind of make this decision of, from day on, making a fresh start and thinking, okay, trying not to get jealous and develop this aversion towards other people's happiness and riches and so forth, but rather just trying to develop this mind of rejoicing in that.
Samba dance, Mindupa, Meba Samba was, Tambola Rangi, the word Duba, Samba la Sum, Sinja Rangi is a nearby Duba la Gawar, Chiri Basa, Petans, De Munduna, Shanchuchi, same Yamban Juas, Chesa Tambo de la Carlegulana, and Sinja Rangi is a nearby Duba la Gawaribas. Simji Koranzo Koranzota, Debuda Chibuda, Kanda Koran, the Duna, Nanzo Gabu or machine, Nanzo de la Tato Chesagi, Yumarella or. Tende inza ani jide chita ngazu ge shanju sem di shanju semba roji samatana karere lawaina ani korangi myude kana jide sum da jide sum chu jide sum da ani saje da shanju semba ta ngazu china ge kala saje bi ne ra chiba phusa da an tende ge saje che ani simje na ne dende be tende ge ngazu ge 심지어는 지당한 주변에서 일을 가지고 계산사서 유지 차고라. 근데지를 팔라 위해서라. 아니 사제에는 가지고 주변에서 일을 근데지 차고라. 지당 현생인데. 안 심지어는 아니 안가라서도 심지어 다시 대화 들어치나 선 근데기 상추고선 라주를 제윤두가나 먼저 데리게 담자고라. 심지어 다시 대화 두행에 있다 이베는 가지고 데라인 바카서 상주 선바치나 상주 선라지로 요바이나 라니 집어 모임 방에 생기 치등에 사지 고마 타베기니 타비 당게는 칼리 제비는 수수이 케네 담자 쉬어라 아슬라 근데 인디가라 인카나 근데기 아니 케네데 담자 치사기 이미지기 아니 심지어는 니고 코란 속에 다 심지 심바도 코란 되고 사야 도에 가리네 코란이 니고도 코란 리버서지 통이 들라 차도 제어디 가서 개와책을 했어라 들라치 때 동을치 들라 가르치는 처럼 막아와치 근데 지주요 말해라 그래서 가서 미코랑 심지 야보이면 지보이면 치들이 상담 오라 대한 심지 지보이면 사야 통연 리 코란 따다데나 당행어 잠질레데 수술라 찌기 잠지요 바이나 들라 가서 차도 제들라 아니 개와도 차고를 들라 가서 근데 제들라 아니 동아 제들라 그거 문도
So then the next section is dealing with abandoning intolerance towards worldly gain, right? And so the first outline, thinking that one's own wishes are accomplished, and likewise that it is suitable to rejoice when sentient beings obtain worldly gain by themselves. So the root verse says, if I wish for all sentient beings to become Buddhas, worshipped throughout the three realms, then why am I tormented when I see them receiving mere mundane respect? So again, it's kind of giving us the same advice of when we see others' happiness, whether it's through worldly gain or gaining respect or whatever it is, to try to develop this mind of joy with respect to that rather than developing jealousy, right? Because again, part of the Bodhisattva's promise, part of what they are striving to do, is to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment, right? So that they will be Buddhas, and then as Buddhas they're worshipped, and they're objects of they're objects of offering. People practice towards the Buddha, and they're the objects of their offerings and prostrations and different types of practices. And so if that is our goal, to make them into that, and yet at the same time we're jealous even when they're just kind of receiving some mundane or some kind of small bit of respect, then it's kind of very contradictory way of thinking. So again, this is why do we, when we see these sentient beings receiving by themselves some kind of something nice or respect or whatever, why do we have a problem with that?
소고에 부도 지외이나 다 소소부가 많이 나리 한다 지금 미정한 저기다 콜 로봇은 소고라 근데 아니 소고비 부고들 아니 춘이 진지면은 또 저랑게 제말라 또 저랑게 지 칼라도 티 근데 소고에 미지 아니 니마지 코란라야 지 도보통문에 가리는 지기 신바지가 로봇은 코란라 초안이나 봐 그 초안이를 코레아 보러 차라 들라 아니 간저 가민지와 라초랑 세상 된대기 믿을라 아니 코 gel아 코랑이 칼라이나 코라라야다 아니 미신바그로 버체 코 지부 주나 먼저 가그르면도 콜로 컨트롤하기 말아 콜로 차도지기 말아서 가이스나 수수가 담봉이라 콜로 소에 치던 수수 깔리 접저라 다 아니 gel아 코 지부 차디 가그로 페나 먼저 미실로 로버체 체체 gel아 코나 로버체 마고 저 코랑 까마가나 또 먼저 베 가그로 오 딘데레 마시 딜라니 컨트롤하기 베스 나기 말와라 토람나데 튀어튀다
So then we have this. We have an example to illustrate this in the root verse, where it says, "If a relative I am caring for and to whom I must provide many things were able to find their own livelihood, wouldn't I be happy rather than angry?" Right. So if we think, maybe it's like a small child or something that we have to feed, every day, and we have to take care of them and provide a little support and care. But then at some point or another, they're able to take care of themselves, right? So actually, when that happens, we would be very happy, right? That would be something that we would be very happy about rather than angry about, right? Before we had to put all this effort into caring for them and feeding them and whatever, and suddenly they're able to take care of themselves. That's actually something quite wonderful, right? And likewise, if we think that someone that we keep having to help every day and so forth, but then they become self-sufficient, they're able to do it for themselves, then again, we would be very joyful about such a thing. So in the same way, this is kind of the example showing us that, this is kind of the example, right? So that when someone is able to finally take care of themselves after we've been helping them, it's really a cause for joy, not for anger or jealousy.
근데 이제 아니 되게 오고 지지들에 가르려드스나 대면도나스 된대게 아니 가서 지기 메지고 차야들라 아니 수수 만데거든 제와이나 디 가르나 상추생 야매기 주로 지레스라 상추생라니 신라 아니 펜토도 신라 선은 당고래 그러나 전에 기우 춘데 갈 마가와 셰디 상추생 마 야매기 아니 주로 차고래라고라 근데 인자 아니 단다 데니스 가르사 대춘 돌라 menduna다 roagi nibatawata simjedo zogi nibaro su junono je kandina kola raba delas ane tela ane nganzo ge chigi magawa chewa dara simjedo de chewaina chirangi shanchu sen de la nga simjedo je la ane shanchu da saje ko ma the de la di de khandes re yesra khashi na ane khashi je la joro de kesi simjedo da shila ane penjo da junono je la soba ane joro yunde gala chana de la thowa da magawa chido as 티 아니 근데기 제미리 바래 티 카르스는 편하게 상주생데 많이 냠도야 기지죠. 그래서 상주생이 칼에 근데기 미 산노 단계들 상주생 여러베스라. 다. 인지도 다르다. 그래서 칼에 카라.
So then, in relation to that example, we have the next verse which says, if we really behave like that, if we do get angry instead, jealous and so forth instead of happy, then our mind of enlightenment, the bodhicitta, will degenerate, right? And so it says, if I do not wish for beings to have even this, how can I wish for them to awaken? And where is there a mind of enlightenment in one who becomes angry when others receive things, right? So, if really when on the one hand, we have this mind of enlightenment, wishing all beings to attain Buddhahood, but we can't stand it when they attain their own happiness in some way. Then it's kind of asking like, where, how can we say that this person has bodhicitta in their mind, right? So the idea being that such a thing would really be degenerating one's own bodhicitta, because that would be a mind at wishing the best for everyone, wishing them to attain Buddhahood and so forth. So if at the same time we become angry when people get things, it's a bit, it doesn't go, it doesn't feed into that kind of mentality.
Drag shoulder, the young con the color Magaya Chajura. Yamangani to way initial use. Today the Nicola Yapoima than the Robache, Karini Chivora. That immediately much low in the Mipashu, so the drag shoulder drawing. Could it you the abo in a young artist Magara Chin? In a the middle chibu, the shoulder chibura, Nara, Pashu chibura, Chibukoi, and Ninja Chipara, Tagora. In some song of Tatuma. So shoulder the Nicola Yapodoji. Mishamara Takoyapo Magara. Nig Longiruda, and the days of the Lochiguna Bangora.
And so we kind of have this sometimes, right? That we regard, we kind of get upset when people have nice things. And so, if someone is kind of on our side, right? If they're our friend and we like them, then at that time, we really do wish for them to have happiness. But then if one day something happens and they kind of become an enemy or someone we dislike, then suddenly, right, whenever they get nice things, we dislike that all of a sudden. So, from the perspective of the person, nothing has really changed. The person is the same person, but really depending on whether they're, a close friend to us or someone who's suddenly become an enemy, so-called enemy, then we suddenly dislike it when they have happiness. But from their point of view, nothing has changed in terms of wanting happiness, right? Right. So the root verses are slightly different, right, as they're kind of discussing these things, but it seems like the explanation is kind of going over it again and again, and it's just really helping us really drive the point home, as it were, right? It doesn't get boring, or?
Because the Yanja she didn't. She got our Karashi, the sourdough in any treasure. They like Korokora, didn't say that to the Janja and emotion Suda, and Jan Pitney so. And then to Kashi some that's our sourdough learn about the Korajet in the Karachi and some the Sira.
Because it's possible, like sometimes we don't like to hear the same things over and over again, right? We want something new and something new and something new, otherwise we get a bit bored, right? So here, when it's kind of going over this point, it's trying to be quite detailed and really go over it again and again and again. It might be a bit kind of difficult, right?
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, but I can speak for a little bit for everybody that from the discussion groups every day, that what we are talking about each day, we are relating to it with things that are happening to us in the present moment or far away. So even if it's kind of like a general the same information, but every day it's like a little bit different, so we can relate to that. So yeah, it's not boring.
Yes, so I mean that's also kind of the point, right? That when we read the text and we're reading it again and again, and to get that feeling that it's really talking about us, right? That it's oh yeah, I really do that sometimes, or this is really talking about me, and because we don't often mean to do these things, but it's kind of on automatic, right? And we're kind of automatic pilot that we all have these afflictions like attachment and anger and so forth, and these things happen. So it's good when we can, studying the text related to our own situation, related to how we behave, and learning from that again and again.
Imagine talo page ni do chugo in chire ngaze delu to kashir ngaze ngi demba shi ko la she ba adme ta ngaze dungi demba shi ora dungi demba shi ta dungi ko la mbo ji share ani da ko do to shi gala ne ta nga pisin nga dungi de san chesa insir nga shanju sembaro da chik chayo sa resa controlla de ke woji mindula sra ngara samara tanga pe shanju sembaro da ona karina ya poji chain sa resa ngala chigi controlla ya da ani chilo lo shashi aro dini ke kuchi mindula sra an kana ne pe agore le da dini ro ngazu dingo ra ta ine ya zamzam zu sembalo de gala dini chirache wo mara controlla sa yu chena ngazu controlla ro chi chakpa ine chala ine ju chala no ji ya poji thongwa de ngazu di chakwa charura tende ro zamzam chen da mache di gala chi ndo shashi don control sama mejo ro tu gala nga pang insare sama shanju samba insare nga chi insare zamzam no sigra ne ko ende do slas ta nga pejin ji de sama pang sa jo ro chi cha sa ala sra nge de ne pe a di nga zo yun jung go res ta ine kya chota chi da ji ma ji shlo do do ti ani chen nge ba ji thiro tu gala cha ta do chi pa ji ina ani cha pe a pa cha re.
So it was a while ago, back in 2019, I was teaching a course on the Four Noble Truths. And then, so as part of that, you talk about the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And so we're discussing all these various types of suffering and so on and so forth. And then one student kind of, perked up and they said something like, kind of the way I see it for myself, I think I'm kind of a bodhisattva, and I think I've abandoned all my anger and attachment and so forth. It just doesn't seem like I get angry and have attachment anymore, right? And so they said that, and so Geshema was like, "Oh, that's very, very, very good, right? Well done, if you really have." But really, if you think about it, then it can sometimes happen that simply due to not meeting with certain conditions, it can kind of seem like we're very well off, right? We haven't met with something that sets off our anger, and so we might think, okay, I'm kind of very patient person, and so on and so forth, right? So just by way of not meeting with these kind of external conditions that set off our afflictions, we might think, oh, I don't have any attachment, don't have much anger, and things like that. So again, the advice to this person was, so that's great, but next time you're out and about and you're doing all sorts of different things, if you still think the same way in that context, then that's great, but see how it goes.
So I
didn't get to see the person again. I didn't take his phone number or anything, so I didn't find out. What happened.
If
it really was the case, then great, but and there's something that can arise in all of us, right? It happens. Right, so it can also happen the opposite way, that as opposed to reading it and thinking this is really talking about me, we can read about jealousy and so forth, and we think, well, no, I'm not really that jealous. And it can happen.
To end
Do you have this experience or no? Well, in general, like reading it and either thinking you have it or you don't have it. So.
Have to work more on things like, jealousy is very common, I suppose. Even if you don't want to feel it, it's just little things as well. Yeah, in the daily. Yeah. Even if you look at the food and there's like a really nice bit, and you're like, I wish I would have read frontal line.
yes, rather the tato the pena and so the Nikun color cups of Pangti Tina and con the Pangti Dena, Pantila Dena, the Nikun cups. One of the Nikun color cups and Pangti, Nichigi.
Panti no.
Panti and con the color Yapuchik Tone and oh, picture and the Tising up with Chiglevna and the Rock Two Song and the case of the drumming like in some Chiglev. I'm too drumming the Levira.
That is Tanaharazdi, Nera Chinjuro, Chishilo, Sedo, the Mudo, the Ajala Tapsajuro, Mishimaji Jala Pisham Japoja, the Nalaran Tata, Kola Maran, and the near some cigra. The color doesn't change in and Zamzam. Hashiyami be some of the Jeshimota, Suzu and the Raw and I didn't Rasun and Chabra Chigda, Cabra House.
Capra?
Noise? The Machala di Rasun and his chance Sui in Alasho, Yakabana didn't party to the Kashi Susan Yewa in the Suda Jedira. Taya Kashi, Mission Magic in Yewaton, or the Nalaran Tatarisanero, the Ligitana Lira.
The other
Check it. Can I show the name the door, show the drawing? Can I get said over the Chirawina? The consumer Pechamudo, Rawina. Ye oh, Nalaran Tatar Dot, that's something euro. In a big Sanatan, Hashi Rawina, Mila Partis, Suchala Carra. Habadan to change the Gonpa San Dedigala, get to the Sungur, Kranzo, Sama Ani Sama, Churros, than my friend rest, and Kranzo Jala Carra, Captura in the Sudel and the Gabula top. What's Jala like the Gonpa Center chamber? Tasholo do Ushanara, and me show me kid and Haumara. Nalola Lawina, the Negi Chalager and the Gabula Chegator. Gekula disciplinary college. Nicola is an itso the Surias, Payedu, Dindela Life. That Tanda has a courage to and Chila has a shoulder in Chichala and Alaran Tata 10 years. In a Kashikajan Santan over there, in a tender did the turning of the Gombata San in a Chalado. Carrera in a Gigula church. They gained the Summer chance and the Chijumas, Sunya, Maris. I'm not the Jalajana Gigula, Giguga, my chadrachin, and Consudagus in the kid.
Yes, so in this kind of environment, it often becomes small things, right? But then when we go out, then it can become much bigger things, right? If you imagine you're out and about and you find something valuable, and people have different ways of reacting to it, right? So some people be, oh, that's so great, and I'm going to keep it. Some people have a natural reaction, oh, I can find whoever it belongs to, or something like that, or can give it to someone else, or things like that. So the way that people react to it is very, very different depending on kind of their personalities and things like that. And so likewise in the nunnery, we would have like a rule that if we found something, right, then even if it's like a pen, if we found something, we were supposed to give it to like the disciplinarian, the person in charge, and then they can find whose it belongs to and things like that. And again, it's just part of the way of how to interact with these kind of objects and how yeah.
Tadiche tanzo di marandora. Dadi kare like the lana mende pagasa sambala sums yenji ni pala thado ki mende di doyamara. Shone ji chashi de dojira. Andi color. Shologa ji chashi di dojira shin. Ta saji di gala kala na yenji ni pala thado mezo padang sa rangi yunden do la mri padang sa rangi di pala Nyangi chawa miri nyangi charisra yenji ise gyawala thado miri ba ta tangbo de la khare yenji ni bala thado ra miri ba yenji ni bala juno no khare thawaina tuzula ma an thado che den ri mara ya po mares la le ba mares keze ani de ketele dina la khare chugudula na ani dala so bala ra dindegi ani juno no che ni ba thawaina tawa tangasa ani jenda china ne binorus 제가 아니 좀 수수가 젠다로 네 랑기 주노 저 추부드네 요와 이나로 되고서 아니 네그 건도서 텔라 카르라나 아니 건도서 대추 텔라미 젠바 젠다마제 다 간데 도도디 카르라 유들라나 아니 달라 소발라 칭냠바 주노노 저데 타오데 가조야 아니 마가와 체와데 디게 말라오라 제가 젠다 마친 tu de jele de kiragi ji ta soso dala sobala nimba shilo le zen rawa inare mi shemba ji ki te wa inare juno ji khande ji wa inare ko le yoba thong de soso la ani mi ki jenjo inare ma jenjo de de ki khara rawa ina tela maga wa che de ani che rumba ma resla.
So then the next section is dealing with thinking there is nothing undesirable in this, i.e. in others attaining their own happiness, right? So the first outline says, it is unsuitable to be jealous of others' worldly gain. So the root verse reads, what does it matter if they receive something or if that thing remains in the benefactor's house? Whether it is given or not, in either case I shall get nothing, right? So again, thinking about times when we see like our so-called enemy receiving gifts or receiving something, then again we generally don't like that because of them being our enemy. But then if we can think about it differently, that whether we give something or someone else gives something, then whenever they are given something, then whether they are given it or not, it doesn't really affect us in any way. So it kind of makes no sense to get angry over it. It doesn't benefit anything in the situation, whether they are given it or they're not given it. For us, nothing changes, right? So in that way, again, it's really unsuitable to get jealous over that because it doesn't really help anything.
Tadi wala di karla rangi yunden la sondo mriba. Tadi khadu karla suzuki yunden to pa torshana din digi marla jula. Ti khandis la wala na pinanga jogi chi mila ani junono jara wala magawa thadola suba thowala suba din chewa da din mambo chewa na rani gi sunam nyamdo ra mila thado dan den se din ma rani gi sunam nyamdo res. Te rangi yunden nyambadala ani chira nyame gi chi chira kare chini din chi gi nis. Todo tanda di la.
So then it is that in the next outline it says it's unsuitable to throw away our good qualities, right? Because in a sense, if by seeing others getting nice things and then we get angry, we get jealous over it, then not only does it not affect them in any way, but the only person who's affected is us, and it's affected negatively, right? By developing anger and jealousy in these cases, then we are allowing our own virtue, our own merit to degenerate.
Tadi odle karle na rangi dibala asra rangi dibala nyange chawale ta susunga chu dibasa sha jujura ti ta di maso pesa songa no thu chi so ani mela thadon den sen de chene di maso lani suso nyange chawala ra ani rangi dibala asa nyange chawa riba den de chene digre stanga ti khasna ngjo jebala ya jor chirangi ngjo ge megewala ne yende yomares ine megewala ne yende chi khareyola diba pa shayo ro dibe yende khasna shayo ba de dibe yende chawa cheson o ta nga de cheson mila thado cheson de cheson ye signa ko lasun la ne so ge juba chewa ne ti gewa chawa ti dibe yende ba tinde chego res la tinde chewa na an kan lan diba res ta nan da rangi se dibala nge chawa ribala de chen digi res yeji gewa la thado cheba mi yeji gewa sawa de la an kan thado chewa ina susole diba sa ge ra tinde chen mi dibala chati de ta ran teng do
So then, quite the opposite, right? It's that we should have remorse or regret towards our own such negativities, and rather than having kind of this jealousy towards others, right? So the root text says, let alone not having any regret about the negativities you committed, why do you wish to compete with others who have committed meritorious actions, right? So for whatever they have received, there must have been a cause for that. So that is a part of their virtue and what they received. So that's something nice, right? Whereas for us, by generating anger and jealousy and so forth, we only generate non-virtue. So now the one kind of redeeming quality of non-virtue is that it's transformable, right? We can actually transform it, and the way to transform it is by having regret. Right? So by regretting non-virtue, it actually becomes virtuous. Right? So and that's kind of said to be like the only redeeming quality of non-virtue is that one can transform it into virtue by regretting it. So by regretting, so rather than getting jealous and so forth, not allowing ourselves to develop these kind of non-virtues, regretting these things instead allows us to protect ourselves or to develop virtue instead.
Tachinangi Anazan Namji Kaudo and a Kawadio and a Karicho and Chimila Tado, the Magawa and the Chashura, Suzunga, then the Chicos and the Konome and Zamza Chashudua. Chasadugalata, oh, yet equal the Sinapo de Milara, Spare, which was Gawachana, Tandu Dibasau, Diva Marta, Ra, Suzunilla Nicola, Suzu Miguel Sinapo, Chato de Ruche, Dibachiche, Tijila Cola. Anya ko chungsla ni ya yira chewara dipa ninza chewara tinde inza nganzul miss ngaran samo khwala khoyeza no chu chungsigir ra chikna bo shere mi chichilana mi tambo me batin thona nganzu magawa chaido ine ta nga de magawa che ngaran gi sonam nya ye gi juta ani nga tarin ri ma son sa sun juba chewa ina ta inge le dipa sa sha ji ya ma nya me da ra dipa ma chu ta ya tinde so so ge wa sa ya la so pendo
So, it happens, right? When we go about, and all of us are still in samsara, we all have these afflictions and so forth. So it happens that we engage in various negativities, we develop jealousy, anger, we say nasty things to people sometimes, and it kind of happens. But then on top of that, if we say, for example, a nasty word to someone, and then we rejoice about it, oh, that turned out really well, right? That was really well done. Then not only do we have the negativity of saying the nasty word, but we also have the negativity of rejoicing about it. So we're making it even stronger in our mind. So of course these things happen, but at least, although we make these mistakes and these things happen, so in the very least, we can not rejoice over these negative things that we do, but rather try to instead generate a sense of regret, right? That regretting these negative actions, and then it actually helps reduce the power of that negative action instead.
안된 전화도 시소는데 간대용 걸라나 특별히 배낭아니 이치 미지다 나라랑아니 미시심베시 오르쳐 야고 민두라 하시라 공갈라라 그 야고 민두라이나 얘기 디가래 야 마르다 오레샤 지지니 마보시 마도라 라 계시 코나이 결혼 야고 민두로시라이나 알레 코나 야고 통 민두로 삼나 디가라 마도 마라 땡이 되버죠 저한테 통도 나라 데도 통도 고지지니 마몰라이나 dano maru ya so diba ma saida chedang so ge chedang pe shangju sende yin chiri yende ju na jes ju la wa pen kran chope ya bodu chi dula no ye gong da ga pe ya bodu la na yende ju na jes mi ji hera ta na kran diga ta do mere ma ta ngla wa yende ju na jes de ne chik chima chi ro ta kanda yende ju na jes ju le ta ga le te ine mi ji hera do ta ne kran diga la yamba la je je ma ta to ne che go ma res.
Right, so and so similarly, not just in terms of ourselves, but also kind of in tandem with other people, right? So, for example, if there's Laura here and she says really nasty things about me, then if they're together with Geshema and then Geshema kind of joins in, it's like, oh yeah, he is really nasty and blah blah blah, and piles on top of the nasty things that she says more of her nasty things, then it grows, right? That whole the both people's negativity grows and grows as a result of that, because of kind of joining in and kind of supporting that. So in that way, it is better not to. So you can kind of recognize that maybe that's what that person thinks, and okay, but not to kind of join in the negativity. So there's like a saying, the shungik,
Shangju sende yin sabs. Shangju sende.
So maybe it's from the path of from a text on the path to the lamp for the path to enlightenment, but we're not sure. That says that that the only thing that you should support or pile on is when it's praise. So we should pile on to praise, but not pile on to negative speech. So if on the other hand someone is praising someone else, then that's a very good opportunity to join in, right? And also praise the other person and do more of that. But if it's kind of someone putting someone else down, we shouldn't join in with that in that way.
기단기 저어디 가서 그 미래니를 사는 당원이나 수수 가와 되어 있는 자가 자나 가와 되어 있는 라 공발 되어 있는 실로라 되는 총한절 자가 제 가와 또 있는 수수기 예용이 믿으라 참고체 기재하고 시야 로아들 타도 맞는 저어디 가서 공동나 콘서트를 유지도 좀 거라 민고 마시지랑 가서 기 타도 돼서 제사라는 말 로 배낭아 데를 되어가 아리 되와지 미심바 가르서 갖다 미지요 제시라 로 딜nga ko thado che ko san che kono ko len dewa mi ngi jing ma sesan ga to thado che wa inare ji ya ko che wa ni ja di su ye ngi mi da ra le wo ra sesan ga to nam sha ju su ji wo da mi zi ji wo ji che ko chana so so ye yu ju mi da be ya ko che be ke chim ra ka sha mi hi ga kin da 예, 칠레 이게 참아도 저러 싶지. 다른 분도 봤을 때 저와치. 근데 진이도. 기타는 뭐 저한테 지나야 게 말이네야. 다 간단한 소리 다 예보 유지 믿어서 소소 미리카리네 제발요. 라. 당한 잠이 충으로 도래. 배나서 단다 될래 미리 담을 라. 그바에 인디아라 이탈리아 가지 제건 담는 이러. 라. 세상한 소리 잠이 충으로 미 가리네 쓰이는 도고. 라. 인지민지 리키 발은 되는 거예요. 소소에 소소 가와 되어 있는 미리 수행이 들라 창본이고 덤부치나 아니 기우다 라 코지레 많이를 파치는 버르다스 로바메로 차로라 모든데도 남들이 선호도나 근데 야고.
So so another way to think about it is that, again, all of us wish for happiness, right? It's something that we all share, it's something that we want. So it doesn't really matter wherever where you are. Then it's really important to kind of have good relationships with the people around you, right? To be close to them and kind to them and build good relationships with those around you. Because again, they kind of become the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, and likewise they kind of become the objects of certain awarenesses. So for example, in the past, if we're here, then it would be very difficult to generate jealousy with respect to someone who's in the US, for example, right? So of course now the world is getting smaller and smaller, but it used to be something like that. So in a sense, but the people who are really around you are the kind of very important to have good relationships with and take care of and be nice to, because of this close relations. And so some people are kind of strange, right? They treat people around them kind of not so well, but then they kind of have respect and try to do well by people who are further away, and that's kind of a bit of a strange behavior. But anyway, nowadays that our world is getting so much smaller, then it's really good to have this attitude towards whoever it is. So it doesn't matter, all of us sitting here from various different countries and different races and different whatever. But rather than emphasizing the differences, just seeing that all of us as human beings developing these good connections between us is something that is very, very important and very beneficial.
제ton 전에 이등한테 딱 통통돼 오라. 카라사가도나 통으른 제라도나 통으로 내가치나 통으로 다지기 곰바타사이나 초소와도 거던 통으로 아니 미신바지나 지데 쿠는도나 스스틀이 비미디 마 투도. 딜라 마가와 샤스네 딱 벌써 통데도 콘로라 아니 스스심바지 오미 안로 체그라. 가디나 사마하고이나 지우다. 파기밀라 지우 스스이 지우 내가치나 내가 차수고 치도라. 라. 가르선도 수 로존치니나 로존도 야보니까 셈바가 강이미라. 다직 미치 마가와 차스도 로존치나 규디 텐데로. 저나 레군을 내가로 치기나 따다 지둥말 저 셈바 마치 콘도로 치랑다 라. 되나 쇼게 나밍ям도 투바 시마시자 아니 이상도 시도나 콜레가 치 키고요마 라. 당도 있는 지기 디바데 내가 제게 게투도 냠도 투바로 저담으로치나 수수기 안제 데블로이나 검자이나 용마 라. 대지바시 샹게 딱아도 가와도 수 내가 체어이네 충무이네 카레이나이나 수수비디 근데 마요에 소거데 베케챵보다.
So whatever kind of context we think about them, so for example here we have the people who are around us, and the thing is that we have to see them every day, right? So, and likewise, if we think about it in the context of the monastery, then these are people that we grow up with, we see them every day, or in your office, that wherever you work, right? So these are people that you end up seeing on a daily basis, and so if one doesn't develop good relationships with them, then it really makes it a very unpleasant kind of experience all around, right? And we can think about how that affects us, right? So, if in general, if everyone is really well and harmonious, then it really helps whatever kind of activity is going on there, whether one is doing one's studies or trying to work, one is really able to work and study and so forth in an undisturbed way. The mind can be focused on that rather than on other things. Whereas we know, even if sometimes if there's just one person who we kind of have a fight with or we dislike, then we end up thinking about that person so much, right? It takes up so much of our mental space that it disturbs us. Like if you had for example, you have a fight with your family in the morning and then you go off to take a test, then actually during the test you're going to be thinking about the fight with the family all the time and you're not going to be able to sit your test. Or likewise, if you're reading something and you're just thinking about that in the office and so on and so forth. So regardless of the context, the people around us, it's very important to be close and harmonious with them as best we can. And so we kind of have to be careful also of that, in the sense that there's all sorts of ways in which our mind kind of runs away with things, in the sense that, for example, if there's someone that we meet initially, right, and we see them for the first time, and we think, oh, they seem like a very nice person, they seem, well and nice and all that, but then someone might come along and they say, oh, that they're not a very good person, they're like this and that, and all sorts of nasty things about them, and then the next time we see that person, immediately we kind of have a different way of looking at them, right? Just because of what the other person said, or if there are different people around and we don't know them, right? So they're kind of strangers to us. We don't really know anything about them, so we don't tend to think much of them. But if someone else suddenly comes, oh yeah, there are all these thieves around here, so you should watch out and blah blah blah. Suddenly we see these kind of strangers and we have a very different way of thinking about them. So this is one way that we need to be careful in how this kind of proliferation of thinking can kind of change the way that we see people.
Dala dubuchina gache, tila dagi ke la pa meba sidi tanaya tila magawa chayado dindigdo tila or ani ranta sa rangi shola soso ge shola ani pembi is keje mission baji soso la roba chewa da dinde ya pa chewa ine dene pemba duya da mission baji o ti che mala pa keje na nganzu tila magawa chayado dinde che ani tambo so dala neba chui se ki kila mezubala sumsa ani dalas da megawe ralas me pens ta sajidi khala da megawe sra rana me pe ba dan sa dala nesen chebe chesa kyang ge dadla dugu chuma de magawa che rana ke phendo ge yo mares chiche ani dala nesen chebe ani tela ani minus kyang ge dala nesen do per dala ne bache samu tawai ne dala ke ne maresra mene ba dan sa rana ne ba chesa dala ya po mauna sam su ne sen sana de chang ta ne dala ke mane ne su ne su ge dibasa ende chibora chesa su ne ba che res tadi tsawa de dala sa megawe rala me pe ba chesa dala megawa che ne rana phendo ge yo mares tsawa di karla ne kete drashi magane kete ngazu drashi la ani magawa ta dala tora ta dala ya po mo til ba ke chewa ra ta kanda dala ya po mo da magawa chewa tela ani tela chuga chishi yus 그 다른 뭐가 왔지는 정말 가르핑이 돌아도도 봐 된다 도도는.
So then we move on to the next section where it says overcoming anger towards the obstacles to what we want, right? So we also get angry with respect to these obstacles. And so we have these main outlines talking about it is unsuitable to be intolerant towards obstacles to what harms our enemies, right? So, we just like we don't like it when our enemies have something nice, we like it when our enemies have something bad happen to them as well. So also ceasing that kind of a mind. And then it is unsuitable, the second one down, it is unsuitable to be intolerant towards obstacles to what benefits us and our friends, right? So we have all these various obstacles to what we want, what us and our close ones want, and we don't like that, right? We don't like things that get in the way of what we want. Like that. So there's, in terms of these kind of outlines, we begin with the first, where again we have three, right, which are outlining this particular way of thinking, that we are not benefited by our enemy being unhappy, and rather generating harmful intent towards our enemy does not harm them, and then it only harms ourselves, right? So that's kind of the way to think, that not only do we not benefit in any way by by our enemy being unhappy, right? Us being unhappy about it and disliking them doesn't harm them in any way. It's only harming ourselves, right? And thinking along those lines. So then the root verse initially says, even if your enemy is made unhappy, what is there for you to be joyful about, right? So even if our so-called enemy is made unhappy, then it's not really a case of joy, right? It's something to be joyful about in any way.
Samchi nas, Chirangi Pegi for Merarota, Magawa Chewadi, and Kola K, Dratilla, and Nibi Jun Jugumaras, Juchag Mares. Kanda Karla wasn't Chiran Kola Magawa Chewine, Kurachi, Nuya that they catching Mares. They gone Kalasana, Chiran Migawa Chewine, Paila Manu Chiran, Susul Sunigur, Chiran Pedoke Marestra.
On the other hand, and it says, the next part of the verse is just your mental wish alone does not cause harm to them, right? So what it says is that, not only are we joyful, when they're unhappy, this kind of mind that is, wishing harm upon them or disliking them in this way, this mentality, this mind that we hold, does not actually harm the other person. It doesn't actually do anything to them, right? The only person that it is harming is ourselves.
Tadichi Doga Tortin, the children is a Sawani Madamada. That any dollar never chunwala Gawa Marik Bas. Dollar never chunwala Gawa. Chesangato give me Dadila Pagila Canido, Dunedo Chuina, and so Gauchira, or Takol to Chunsalanga, TH and Digamara Ra. Ani church in Dube, Dungedi, Chujigi, and in the Parugu Pudilla, Ani call Dungedo Chuina, they dunge the true way. Ani Chugachishi, Chan Kashin Gaidus, Kula Dunga the Wachum and the China, Chan Kashin Gaidu, the guy Marella.
And so the next says, not only does it not harm the enemy, it just harms ourselves, right? So the verse says, even if they do suffer as you had wished, what is there for you to be joyful about, right? So although our wish for them to be harmed, the wish for them to suffer, doesn't actually harm them. But even if what we wish for comes true, right, then actually, what is there to be really joyful about? It's not really a cause for rejoicing when others are harmed in such a way, right? So okay, so let's put a stop there and we can have the question and answer. So and it can be questions about anything, it doesn't have to be about the text, and we'll do our best to answer.
Sometimes when there might be conflict happening between people and they come and talk to me, I find it hard to recognize when I may be joining them in putting someone down, or I feel like it can be a fine line between joining them and not. I find it difficult to figure out what to do.
There's a mini yupache and a consultis argument chegrewa and in the capsule something consoki nala and the shekar yongire or me de didum dice pare and a kerangi samsul kare the neki so ngala dende keta chigi resa and they
Tena
cups
tapena ngani ni di chango marwa. Pena ende sha sha. Ta ngani mi sa digala.
and they
Kole kiji tigra.
ah
ngani chango mi kharche ola ore.
and they cups so con tis madeo chagi rawa gas na ngona chinanga di yapochine hako mare khadu de tis lapcha jana chigire khatsan di yang merataya kongso nangshin merataya yang chaksigire just the yapo mare so the satsam kawore
Tadi kyana la ni kogi. Sisine kyana ge lamde chinra. Ye chini ji ge la ora. Kona ge ti ye che ji. Pena ngani tu ba shode ora. Tangegi lora la ora. Ko pe a mundu ngani tu ba shosong ji la ni dende ro pe dira. Dende dira. Pe dende shi diga la ngi sembo i kangi ro di lora la shi ko la shi go. Wa shi diga la ta ngi semba na la ichi ro ju sa ko la ki shi go mo shi ka ju ma ju ngani ke sam mi shamba la ma ro. Wa dende la ndu ta kyang ge tayar di ko la ani kyang ende ma je la lab ja ro ja wa. Dende shi ra che ma res. Ma ga wa chi de nga zo sama ki yo ma res. Ko la lab ja de nyesa ma ro ta wa ta mo. Wa kyana na ichi de na du to bon de wu ni bu ina kyana lab ja ja wo kyana ende ma je ende. Wa ke si yang mid kinza ina koran lab ja ja ne ya ko lo ba na si la. Ale ngala lab ja ja ko ni pe chang bo ye sa ro chen ro ni. Dende mi ji na de zo che ra. Nye ta di la nga zo ge la thu ma ra. Chirang yi nga zo de tuba ja da chi khondu la ya da ko ni de suba ja na chirang ya ma ra. Kyang ngola sam ta ko na no thu yi. Kyang yi ta ji ya ho chi la na. Ra. Pasho sho ma ri tsu sho me wa che. Kyang yi de ge uya ju je kar du. Ti chirang yi de ba gonda ra la sama su na ki bu yo ras. Ani chirang yi de su no thu su ge shu da chen. Pa me ba zan ya bore de ne ro chi na ya ji ro. Shimba ya ko na ge ro ko chen o ko pe du je na. Pasho sho du ra. Chirang kola magawa che kondo na tuba je pe abor na de di gomara ra tadi susugi ne ta na tagi tagi
Yes, so it really very much depends on the situation, right? But the best thing to do is, again, not to join in with the one person putting the other person down and kind of join in with the argument and take sides, but rather as best as you can really try to kind of help in bringing about a solution of some kind. So you have to, listen to what the person says and see, again, kind of on the one hand advising them that, when people are in disharmony and things are, fighting between people, then it creates problems for everyone around and it's something that is an unhappy situation for everyone involved. So it's really good to be able to solve that. So if you can think about what your part in that was and what their part might be, and if it really was your fault, then you should own up to it and really analyzing the situation as best you can and try to help them kind of bring a resolution to it rather than joining into the kind of the blame and criticism.
to the pe zaza chigo pe ke shong ra kuni changbo de yago chitu na de ya ba ra zamza kuni ya changbo yago chigo so na su ti paru chu de jo so di paru la ya chu ru zamza ra ke shena ma di na ta khalo kuni chira ye kuni changbo zo ya gi ngal de ba yo ra tingi ke shena ma di nya ngara di nyam do ya thubal lang de de chan ne jo ma ra jungna koran di chambo ya zo tu ne de zo ma tu ne de le shahar koran di samta ya ma do shuchi tu mara shi tu ni je ne ga chi ra pena chi je ko di ne ma je de gala ta ga di pe ro sha ne ra je ko shima de shara chi tu mu da ra kuni chambo cha ya chi ta koran ni jing paru de ta samta o ta ga jing ne chi mu de ye ma mi chama se she du ne ro so kali ma shi shiwa cha ne ya bora me shi shimba mi ni ji ne chi and tu ma je ya ma re la Yamid get the match, I could show it, I'm not sure it's a madressida. Then they sort of the power in the Yapore de Maton, that really do a share.
But yeah, it's something you kind of have to be careful in how you approach it, right? Because if you're able to really bring a resolution to the argument or whatever, then that's great. But sometimes, we kind of we butt ourselves in, and then it can actually make things worse, right? Because the person thinks, oh, they're doing like this and they're doing like that, and then we actually get caught up in the argument. So then it's better not to really kind of insert ourselves into that, and having to accept that sometimes, okay, there's nothing I can do about it here, so I just leave them to it. And we even see this on the level of countries, right? The one country has a fighting with another one, and other countries are not immediately jumping in to kind of to intervene, because it might actually make things worse if they do, because it can create a much more severe situation. So it's about just being careful and knowing when to and how much to intervene, and how to, if one can really benefit the situation and solve the problem, then that's great, but not to get caught up in it or sometimes even make it worse.
데버로주나 군이 창보조 주고라 그러게 통이나 군이 이제 농라도 그걸 빼 고라니나 내가 빼 걸어 내가 자라고도 차리라 미 이제 농라다 또 저는 단데 단데 개 말에 빼나 우리 거기지 차라라요 진주지가 농빼 처물아 줘라 그들가 카도 농라도 그걸 저는 럽자 파주잖아 님 말이 수주잖아 님 말아 다 그들가 별로도 샤라 산이나 제라 안데 잘라데 데 콘춘주라 데데라 즈바자가야 싫어 민도아 아니 군이게 로디마 시사데가 랍제잖아 야야가요라 로 첨볼한데가 철랍자가도 단도 쓰까지는 얘도 차서 쳐 가지 라게 안에 라이라 라 데 탑시다한다 다고 담라이라
and especially we kind of have to be careful about intervening when everyone's in the midst of the anger, right? Because if there's two people and they're in the heat of the moment, they're very angry and they're really in the middle of the argument, then for them the situation really seems very severe at that moment. And sometimes it's even silly things, like maybe the cup broke, right? And they're having an argument about that. But for them in that moment, it becomes a very severe, very kind of important thing. And so if we kind of try to intervene in that moment, it might not go very well for us. So it's much better to kind of, maybe just leave it and wait it out, and when they're a bit more calm, then kind of come along, and then you can talk to them and say, actually the cup is not worth much, and blah, blah, blah. So it really just depends like that.
소소디로 바카차하는 야 소소를 대행이거든. 그걸다 칼로다 빼 탑켜버서 가야 돼. 전부더라.
So when guys fight, it's, sometimes it gets to fists, right? And so I don't know about women. Maybe they pull each other's hairs and things like that. So then when you're trying to jump in to separate them, you have to be careful not to get hit yourself, right? So you have to be quite skilled in how you intervene.
Yeah.
So any other questions?
Yeah.
So I was reflecting on the topic of money and making money, especially going out there and in a mainly capitalistic world. It's all about more and more and being successful and adding up. And so it led me to the question of, yes, having money is good and it's necessary, also having savings. And then I was reflecting on the savings, if I share them more, or how much, and it's just very confusing on when and if I'm adding too much, or if I'm like giving up parts of my path to be part of the capitalistic way and work, and finding the, let's say, ethical work environment is fairly difficult, or not to be really seen through from the beginning, unless I do it just maybe alone, have a way of like working alone and finding a way like that. But as soon as I go in like a broader company or environment, it's very much down to competition and adding more. So what could be an approach to see through this jungle? Money.
아니 공기데 물 사야다 내가 제약이 콜라 마보스는 땅선서 아니 디티스칼 카토이르와 가인스나 축진은 아주 자만디 레카치 아니 디 체는 아주 물 마루 사고레 상탄데 내기 산소이르와 아니 찍데 물기 콜라레 아니 디 문에처럼 물 같이 거기래 나서 물 강나데 티 세이빙스 체기로와 아주 마루 세이빙체 and the cat monachana katsugo and chichanangi matana and fetching the get chagira bache chekire and shempading lekaki holare and lekache young cans and mus sayala and lekache gore and lekadela young kind of soso ki kare range ki leka chere rang gerki leka chere ma to and kind of shempala de lokzu the company jump in the key, like a chat on the some bed picture one, some be looked so much at this color for it.
Competition.
The competition down the doctor Jamin Jairawan. Correct, looked so.
Company in the Levachina. The Lotso, Karamil Zumaro, and the children.
Just did some other countries. The jungle Nanshin, Shinang Nanshin. Shinang Nanshin. Shinang Nanshin.
Alele.
Kawajogi, Kalikafu.
Touching Azuki, Peshanal, and the Jun Choshe, that the Jun Choshe, let go on the Pangona, Siam, you to him, the dish like Omara. The Washiba Choshiba, the Bachung Choshiba, Tigalana, Pena, Ngala. Deep in a Gomuja wood and hockey. Gomujara, Tashatano. Nija was she take you, Matanga, the Nekazura, Chitanga to Google. The greeting and Dom Chamberlain. Today, Chitigala, Susugata, the Chuncho lady, GMS, I am to him, the woman, Migi, the Tora. That's all the thing, did some Sama Channel Sunday. So the Goya Channels and David Tuba Mapochi. Some of them shoes, not better for new shoes and another low and a Jaradona de Humor, Kazimo Kazina, Susan Missile, the son of the Lorello Pandosun Kazu to Kazu with the Telesopatan, Chitana to Kadishigi home at the she would say like a sometime catch humor. But the moo man is a Sudan. She has me that I had another Carlagon, Sociology. Sayat Nunnery and decide Combinary, Tapajuta Gora. In a delipe, the Dongam Channel, and the making the bus in the kind of Ra. Penacana and the ocean desertion. And the Tanda Zibata, the color plus the cemetery Cambarojana. Jelanga Hoti Tamani, Moo Cambaros. Jelanga say Cambaros. Jelanga take a number of yo. Ra, Jella Carrigan on my Mitama one, the Tumbadina. Chushing us, Chupo. Only then I'm the net on the Zamni did the Dika, Jacobi, or just how many do show, you know. Then double pitch Mushadora. The next chairman, the Susan Dibber was some Shira. Any time kissing Mambo in the courage to go to Slamasa. So you in another Mr. Shuju chairman. In a that's again, oh, that I'm Mambo do something. That Koran Yaja they came in the house, Michelle, Nazu number of the Nina, Kajibat Tangra, so we took about the Mawena, Michu, the Nebado, the Jibatawina, Chini Koran Kadu Pagay de la Pengira. The son of the cheap picture of Madame Rashu William, which on the Gavasayada, Chisangazogi, Jembe Lonju, Tuji Delen, Zaja Lorina, Jambaton, Latin, Joshman Jungres, Jembe Lonju Tuji Data, Pena Miller Zuboro, Mamu, Gomdini Mijina, Kula and Tila. Zubeg is Zubagoma and down the Demaches. The color and the Zubagoma Zubian down there. And he made a need you a child like yourself. That is out there in the neck and they do your cool Jebushura. Kisichan Ningudo in the Mawi and some of the Jambata, the Nichine, Yapo, Penny, Hangando, and me, you, the Kangibura. On the thing.
So the general advice, right, is that we always say that it's good to develop small desires and develop contentment, right? So those are the two main qualities that we should strive for, having, little desires and striving to have contentment, right? Because then that's what really counts, right? Because then if we decide we need 100 of whatever, $100, 100 rupee, whatever, and then we get that, then we can really feel, okay, that's great, I got it and it's good, that's what I need. Whereas on the other hand, if we're not able to do that, and it's really the mind of greed that, it kind of pushes us to thinking I need more and more and more, and never being satisfied with that, never finding contentment with that. So it's not that we just kind of decide that we don't need anything, right? It's not that we give everything up and we don't need anything, because we need to survive, right? We need somewhere to live, we need food, we need clothing, we do need certain things. But there is a certain point where, there's more than what we could ever use, or there's more than what we really need, and then that's when we can find that kind of that line of between having too much and having and what we need, right? Because we can also think that we're not going to live for hundreds and thousands of years, so we don't have just all this sort of unlimited amount of time. And so actually there's only so much that we can put this money to use at the end of the day, right? If you get all this money and more money, at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do with it. You can build a bed with it or something, but I mean, at the end of the day, what are you going to do with it after a certain point? Once it goes beyond what one might be able to use it for what one needs in one's life. So that's kind of the general kind of idea, Whereas on the other hand, if we let the mind remain, our desires grow strong due to greed and we don't know contentment, then it just becomes a never-ending process, right? That we just seem to need more and more and bigger. And then, for example, we have a house and it's kind of made of cement, and then we're like, okay, so now I need one made of silver. And then we think, okay, but now I need it made of gold. And then we need it, we also need a plane, we need this, and we need all these. And we think, okay, I'm going to take control of all these countries so that I am kind of the ruler of it all. And it can kind of, it doesn't stop, right? So rather than that, thinking again in terms of these having small desires and contentment and finding that balance somewhere along those lines. And then if you find that one has a lot of money, if one, for oneself, consider one has a lot of money, then that's a nice opportunity to practice generosity, right? And so whether one is giving it directly or however, there's a lot of people in need. And so not only does that benefit others, but we can also think that it benefits ourselves, right? In terms of, so there's a particular verse that says, from generosity comes richness or wealth, right? So in terms of thinking of the different effects of these practices, we can also think that, that's a good way to utilize the money in terms of creating benefit not just for ourselves, but also for others.
Noni punre thay shiva chas lajar. Nda, nor juno jura. Di control like that, control like this, control like that. Punta thay shiva chaladigal, juno no just say the control like juda. Megawa sayagi, the butts of Chimbo sayagi, jucha or less. Kaina tambo juno maybe Negala juno saya, Tashitamura. Jagato, the Takantes Mura to Tashimamo Tamwa, Marani Kangi, the Rayachi, the Zumashinity, the Milan Neptudo Shinity, that Karin the Tashimamo Tamura. Tambo Marai Kangichi, Tambo de Rasa the Sajati, and the Raya Tabjela, Zumashi or the Mila Zibushi or the Mila Condola or the courage in the Raya Tashdan. That the Ratsana paying Maria. Tadi Jaladi and the Marmar Sagway, Kolodumichi, Ranga, Tam Teleco, Mabasa to me. That Ratsana paying money, this Sunjochi, Ra, I think you the Kumashum, you the mission by the Tamorado, the Karini, Jashak Manison, send it to Bado. Matsikamin, Kohin, Sendimida. She's not could Tambo, the Marai, and Ratsadical, the Sunjochi way, Kani. Only young. That is not in the road, Mudu, Nukan Shashera, Tanga, Penangado, and wishes and a on the Shuna Sorishes, and then ashes and a gather was at the little and the Shazana, so Mashipato, so the Pejataira, so Kadishu Hagmara, the day, Ania, the Delaedo, Shimba, the name in Crying College of Miss Hansa Sasha, touching Pinga in a Poo in a Toponia Karin, Kilapunzo Chubaja, Gichani. Says on the young Yuda, Kashi, Pamadu Shana, Pameg Sasha, Mudile, Pudu, and the Chupaja, the leader. The lady cannot get, the Sabi, Nicola Diba was at Zumasho and a Tabacho and a Tasso College of Chimambuji Chera, Tidugalas of the Divachisa. That cannot be Shizadigalas and Tanga and Tidra, Shizadigale, any. Yandi Junodi, Miller Kundolai, Jucha, Chad, and the Sigra. There's not this Mukana shower in a Kuisha or Shashan and Nishibal Pajamataru cheese and light in the Shadadua, Nichina, and the Musibat and Deva. This is not Shizuna Toyra, Ra, Hamatosa de Pugud is much higher later. How did you know that I'm getting near the corridor?
So there's a saying that riches are the cause of many problems, or the cause of non-virtue, right? So we can really see that in our experience, right? That first of all, when we're thinking about before we have them and we're striving to get them, right? So in order to get these things, we end up engaging in so many non-virtuous activities, right? To try and strive for them and get them and, work to get them. And then when we don't get them, right? And then some people resort to all sorts of other things like stealing and lying and all sorts of negativities that are involved with just trying to get these things. So there's so much negativity even before we get them. And then second, once we actually get them, there's also so much negativity involved because, once we do get one thing, we always want more and more and more, right? So it gets us again into this negative cycle of wanting more and more. But likewise, once we have these things, we think about all the different ways to protect them from others and things like that. And again, so much extra concerns that we suddenly have, all these things, extra things to think about just because of owning these things. And then at the end of the day, right, and then thirdly, at the end, eventually one is going to lose them, right? So, of course, you can kind of put them in a bank and, you can have like a will, I guess, that will tell, that once I die, this person gets this and this person gets this, and that's great. But actually, often we see that it causes a lot of arguments in families, right? When, like, the mother dies and then the children suddenly start arguing over the money, right? So even when you lose the money, it creates so much suffering for so many people. So, even before you get it and while you have it and after you lose it, it really just creates so many problems and difficulties for everyone.
Tanda korangi tiwadile nga yema ende michigi tiwadesra pumujidu. Moradel les. Ane korangi pala ka Bombay na harachi de woresa. Ane pala pe chubu yoresa pe. Hansa ek chubu insara yema la mami na harina han. Ngumpe mo yoresa. Tanda pumuda pala ama tonsa insara. Kui kha de do de da de ala kha de. Pati pala lo yechu ina goju ta pe ngoresa sha. Tene pomuya lo os chimbo chasa ta. Yo chunju mare. Koraya amado chasa shira. Tene ni ani pomu koraya ma la chi ngumpe mo yoresa marane. Dene chinga tus del lesra ni korang kangi dinga la shega les dene ta korang ki pala gengoche ani kuroba majana susu palarwa ruba chaga do da jinna na ani menyo ya do da ani kala de nyo che do da dene ruba chi yesa ta chega do digala pala de pe di thopa chawo yesara kya ngezale le di khala nga gno pe mo boyro ngudu no boyro kya di saya chi de le ibala yantes magawa che ja ine ya pala korangi segresa khala shimbosa do son tang an koran mega de ngu kazudo na kola sende yo maresa tati milba shugursa so pomula de shugursa tiko pe sende yo resa ani tesin zamza ko ende la yusra popodi ta ko korangi pala da lo chimbo cha popo chasara te ngarangi juno lanchi sama ngarangi dugis se kala tegi mes la ande le dusa ra ngarangi ti pechetangi me ba tegi me ngarashine ngarangi kidu ina ande le dulasra te ta nga kharchi gurlasra de dinde le dusa ngaroba chaga de korangi kala to baro sangi juno lonchi lenga imur samegi de to pasa dusa ngade ende le go che me ngarala chasa yo khamba yo desangu chasa yo lasra ine ngarangi pala imbe chani ko roba chaga de ende le dusa ende pala gi ngu de koran dosun tangi dusa me ngana do che do na build khazle na ko gagus kangu pe momora me ngana do dosun tangi taje ro che na ngu de koran la do ne build khazle na o hote tisha le dusa ta shimbal te ko pe de bache me dusa ani ta nyegi di chasa ngara ki do gi la dusa ta nga khar che gure la stende la na tengi ende le ta kya ki ju le ga ta na chana chama pe je ta ngona kare pe je ta ngona tang kya do di ga la chama kya ki es ngala mo go la le ga ke to mara te ko lo de ro ra ni je ra gen go kya kare yen kya ki do je ngala go ya me nga chasa yus ani pa la chana ki do she la na ko lo de ro che ani kya de be na chana kare pe je ta ngona sa go en tung ne me nga do kya pe je ta ngos te hamat samachran ki jula ne la le ba no cortes lo de oda din chagra chisa mi sana ta ndam da kinda da ti na de chance ra chasa
So it just made me think of the story of there was a woman who came to me with a particular question, and she told me the story of how, like, so pala bombela de
pala korangi pala
and in the bombela
pala bombe banglo khanchi de was
in kong in san ko kaka de
korangi jira kaka de ina bomo de ni mangaji des
san pomo de bombe ne
bombe ne ro
so the woman was
ta ta temasta ta khada koni de de
Okay, so we don't remember what the place exactly, maybe Bombay or Bangalore, that the woman came from, and so she had a very elderly father who was like in his 80s or 90s already, and he was very rich. The father was incredibly rich, but she was also, she was quite well off, right? She wasn't wanting for anything, and she also had children and all this kind of stuff. But then when the father was getting older, and so she came to help take care of him, right? But the problem was that the father had a lot of kind of doubts with respect to her even, and so he would say things like, oh, you're only here because you want my money, and you're not really here to help me, you're just here after the money, and blah blah blah. So on the one hand, he was okay with spending it on himself, like so when he had any medical bills or anything like that, and it would be however big the bill was, he would pay for it and no problem. But if it was anything to do with like giving it away, then he would not budge 1 inch. And so he kind of even had this attitude of I'm going to use it for this and this, but then when I die, I'm taking it with me. And so so people have all sorts of really strange thinking. So the woman was just very hurt because she said he's my father and that's why I came to help, right? I don't need his money. I don't she had enough, right? But he had this kind of attitude, and so she came to ask Geshema like, what should I do about this? And so Geshema told her, it's okay, just tell him as follows. And so she kind of said to him like, okay, when you die, you can take it. It's fine. I don't need the money, so you take it with you, and it's all good, right? Right? And so apparently that kind of calmed him down a little bit. It softened things, right? But so the point is, people have all sorts of very strange ways of thinking around the money. So any other questions?
I have some reflection regarding the question presented yesterday, I think by Chen, about pride and Bodhisattva, cultivating this attitude of Bodhisattva, at the same time having pride of such importance. I think that it can empirically be observed that individual can be compassionate and kind, but at the same time with a lot of pride. For example, we can see it in some Dharma teachers or in doctors, particularly surgeons, that help people and save lives, but still have a lot of pride. And also people are engaged with humanitarian work, relief, social workers and so on, can still have a lot of pride. So only the cultivating this attitude by itself is not enough to uproot pride, self-importance, which is the crux of the practice, leaving aside individuals that are entertaining others or bringing joy through arts and performances and so on, can have huge self-importance, even though they are bringing joy to others.
Kasangatsu de kare Jonju ki semdang ngagel ki Jawal dang majel ki ketashi chik sung sung and jetsan de kan kungi chewa dang jawaro and de kapsu and de Jonju sempa de sung when ngagel yo mare es kan sana kuntu ngage ngone yana ne kum mi sempala peche pengi mare inang kungi chena de in angatsu kat tonsu dende kimi mampu yore konsumi shempala ropa cheken ina yang konsula ngangel shepa chegi yore me amji ka she konsuta konsumi shempala shepa chegi pengire ene konsula ngangel be mampu yore yana chapken yana she tanken dan chapken detsu konsu yang mi shempa ki de pe kipo yang ki chede di chegi yore konsula ngangel shepa chegi yore wa ane jetsan dende yang tong sigro
di kodo shayu semba mara
but maybe they're not bodhisattvas, right? So, we're just kidding. We're just kidding.
Kalana di yang pena ore chen di nganzu pena amji ro sine ro di konu chita ki pen bi le gare me shambala pen go re na sa chi go re ya por wa ine koran konu di nakera chen buso ra konu motivation pe ra le ra konu choto cha nga pen din tumba yin 상황에 계시 amji chi yashi dunga che go sana ra tene ko thado le ra anji shin ba ya bujile na tila magaya che o phagi anji de mando ya poshira yo marta la gachi mera do tanga 라 마시 왜 이게 파게라 펜도 파게라 지지 이제 거슈치는 티칼라나 고누 쪽살 라 지당 가서 안됐다 안지스니 펜 봐야 버리 이내 암지도 군두기 거기 저놈 중에 송고를 빼 개점을 안지다 나 펜바다 너스도 주요 때 마시베 개점 가서 미질 강이 테네레고라 라 근데 여다 암지는 정말 야보이 미쳐봐요 가시기 나로 로아도 쳔바도 로 그마제 송 아니 지도 라 근데 정말 야보 말어 와이 가시기 총다 그 내가 된다다 그런게 무사야다 뭐다 아니 그런 게다 치 근데 뭐여라 라 암지 참아 semba sam지 semba다 아니 요마라 라 암지 내래 아니 디체 아니 심바카르
No, indeed. And so yeah, so it all really much depends upon the person's motivation, right? So we can take again the example like a doctor, and so of course they can be practically benefiting people, but in terms of their motivation, it can be coming from very different places, right? So on the one hand, there are doctors who are very kind of altruistic and they're really wishing to do it for the benefit of others, but then there are others who, although they are benefiting, really have this aim of I'm going to become the rich and famous as a doctor, or I'm going to be the best doctor, and then that kind of motivation for doing, even though they're doing kind of the same work, that motivation for doing it creates all sorts of other unhelpful ways of thinking. Like suddenly they're going to have, they're going to be looking down on other people who are going to do similar work, and it creates all this kind of negative ways of thinking that kind of contradicts or gets in the way of this bodhisattva attitude of doing it for the benefit of others. So in that way, seeing that kind of that pride in these people, it kind of really gets in the way of that bodhisattva attitude. So it's just really dependent on the motivation how that becomes that or not.
근데 이제 가서나디 베케이션 보러 와다 생리 바이나리 가리나 배 남라 디야여 살은 주여여 된제기 배 레갈랍 좀 배는 아주 따처럼 있는 다른 물리 남들들 레 생리도 야저로 빼버려 미지 나와이나 로아도 첨바도 제바제로 타즈 바장모저 담을 제도 중문에 야버려 된제기 갈로다 밀로 버치야를 민데 터네기 항상에게 가서 셀레게 버려 이내야 잠자 고lun도 디초도나 레간담을 치에는 레기도 라 근데 제가 아주 이 미실 강의 틀는데 암지도 땡고 암지도 디 공사tion에 가디는 송구도 간조기 직 미스니들 집안 남주 초도 치와 항상 야보여스 디데 냠도 아주 직 러저 치와네 생리 장이나 멤버 장이나 다 가르장이나 디 냠도 야럽죠서나 있다 야럽죠나 미 장주다 직 레진데나레 다 레진데 케말레나 미 장보 장보장자 이내로 그 잘라를 꼬마자기 말에 미기 로아다 쳔바도 좀 누우서 말에 그 장보 이내로 근데 이제 딘두기 세리다 딘두기 신 냠도래 안가라저기 최다 최수이나 인지면이 남배치고 말에 추글합자 야보는 요라 그래서 냠도 저거래서 냠도는 아주 지우도지네 서저 내고야 될 피투도 쇼코치 맞으면 데스칼 하고요 너는 너 냠도 저거라 딘데로 쳐거래서
So of course there's a lot of benefit that comes from all sorts of different professions, right? So we have doctors and nurses and scientists, so all of us came from different countries maybe, so we all came on a plane, and we would have been able to do that without the scientists who invented the planes and all this kind of things. So we can see that there's very obvious kind of benefits that arise due to these people working in these kind of things. But just that in and of itself, it does not immediately translate to this attitude of benefiting others, right? So of course, doctors and scientists and all these kind of things are very, very important to the benefit of society. But then, as His Holiness is often saying, that education alone tends to be quite deficient. It's not sufficient to fully round the person's being for the well-being of everyone. So you need, together with that, you need also this kind of ethical education, whether it's secular or religious. So it doesn't have to be the Buddha Dharma. It can be any religion and it can be secular as well. But having some kind of ethical education together with your science education or medicine education or whatever, to kind of pair the things up, then it really kind of complements each other to be able to carry that out in a much more beneficial way. And so it's kind of like the two wings of a bird, right? For a bird to fly, it needs both wings. If it only had one, it doesn't really get very far. So in that same way, not only do we need that kind of level of education, but together with that, the learning how to be ethical and well-meaning with that, with how we use that.
그래서